I'm so happy that Ellen Bryant Voigt is here. She's another poet I've admired for a tremendously long time. Her poetry has always deeply moved me. It's a poetry that is absolutely fluid and lucid and musical, and in which every single syllable, every sound is where it is for a reason. There's so much attention in her poems. That's how she gets them to sound the way you will hear the way they sound. There's a deep heart in these poems, and again, brilliantly made things. You know, the more brilliantly made a poem is, the less you're supposed to notice how brilliantly made it is. When you see a ballerina jump up and come down and look graceful and gazelle, you know that it took them 20 years to do that, and their toes bled, and etc. The same deal with poetry. She too was recently nominated for the National Book Award for her most recent book. I forgot to bring it up here and hold it up. She'll probably be reading from that. She's one of our very, very best poets. After she reads, I'm going to get up, read one poem quickly, and then say some thanks. Ellen Bryant Voigt.
This is a poem out of a sequence that's called The Art of Distance. This is number 4. When you saw your father last, he was tied into a chair with a soft sash. The nurses had parked him, nearly weightless, near the window in sunlight. The shook filaments of fine white hair repelled every bead of light as his tremulous head drooped on its stalk. The whole stalk drooped, curving down and in. The chin sank toward the concave chest. The arms were veined sticks from the sleeves of the gown like a sack, but his hands, delicate, unlined, deliberate, were reaching forward as a small child might reach to stroke the warm, bright beam that struck his knees. Still a doc, the charge nurse said behind him at the door. Still wants to diagnose. Said the knees sometimes show how close death is. A puffiness or granulated skin? You didn't ask. Seeing the focused will he lived by, the avid mind take its scientific measure, the tips of the fingers glossing both kneecaps, comparing each to each or to the many patients in his head. The rest of the body barely moved, except its slow declension, the labored breaths so slow and far apart, as though to practice for the long, deep dive the great sea creatures make, only matched in humans by the held moments when its brain shuts down in order that the infant be delivered. And now I'm going to read against scientific knowledge. That's why you brought us here, right? That's why you put a poet in your midst. Have a little subversion. It's the right corrective. I taught for 3 years at the Georgia Tech of the North, which is also called MIT. So I know that you're deeply subversive. This is a poem called The Hen. See, we get, from Eddie, we get Praise of the Cat, and this is The Killing of a Chicken. It's called The Hen, and this is one way you can do it. It's probably not how you do it in Georgia. The neck lodged under a stick, the stick under her foot. She held the full white breast with both hands, yanked up and out, and the head was delivered of the body. Brain stuck like a lens, the profile fringed with red feathers. Deposed, abstracted, the head lay on the ground like a coin, but the rest, released into the yard, language and direction wrung from it, flapped the insufficient wings and staggered forward, convulsed, instinctive. I thought it was sobbing to see it hump the dust, pulsing out those muddy juices, as if something deep in the gizzard in the sack of soft nuggets drove it toward the amputated member. Even then, watching it litter the ground with snowy refusals, I knew it was this that held life, gave life, and not the head with its hard contemplative eye. This is a little travel poem, since I was traveling today. And it's called The Last Class, and I wrote it for my MIT students. When I left there, I was really leaving undergraduate teaching. And I was trying to get back to Vermont, which is where I have lived for about 34 years now. So this is a poem called The Last Class. Put this in your notebooks. All verse is occasional verse. In March, trying to get home, distracted and impatient at Gate 5 in the Greyhound station, I saw a drunk man bothering a woman. A poem depends on its detail, but the woman had her back to me, and the man was just another drunk. Black in this case, familiar, dirty. I moved past them both, got on the bus. There is no further action to report. The man is not a symbol. If what he said to her touches us, we are touched by a narrative we supply. What he said was, I'm sorry, over and over, I'm sorry. But you must understand, he frightened the woman. He meant to rob her of those few quiet, solitary moments sitting down, waiting for the bus, before she headed home and probably got supper for her family, perhaps in a room in Framingham, perhaps her child was sick. My bus pulled out, made its usual turns, and parted the formal gardens from the common, both of them camouflaged by snow. And as it threaded its way to open road, leaving the city, leaving our sullen classroom, I postponed my satchel of your poems and wondered who I am to teach the young, having come so far from an honest love of the world. I tried to recall how it felt to live without grief, and then I wrote down a few tentative lines about the drunk because of an old compulsion to record or sudden resolve not to be self-absorbed and full of dread. I wanted to salvage something from my life, to fix some truth beyond all change, the way photographers of war, miles from the front, lift print after print into the light, each one further cropped and amplified, pruning whatever baffles or obscures, until the small figures are restored as young men sleeping. You can probably tell I didn't get this accent from Vermont, however. And flying in, of course, as soon as you see that red dirt. I grew up in red dirt in the Southside Virginia, which is the top of that Piedmont swath. And I want to read you a couple of poems that have that landscape. And again, especially after Marilyn's wonderful Carver poems. This is a poem called Bright Leaf, and Bright Leaf is the particular kind of tobacco that was grown where I grew up, and is the main cash crop. They don't raise it like this anymore, but this is the way they used to. Like words put to a song, the bunched tobacco leaves are strung along a stick. The women standing in the August heat for hours since first light under the pitched tin roof, barefoot, and at their feet the babies, bare-assed, dirty, eating dirt. The older children hand the leaves from the slide, 3 leaves at a time, stalks upright, 3 handers for each stringer, and 3 more heaped canvas slides waiting in what little shade there is. It's 10 o'clock, almost dinner time. They pull the pails of cold lunch and mason jars of tea out of the spring when they see the farmer coming from the field. Their men stripped to the waist, polished by sweat and tired as mules. By afternoon, the loose cotton dresses, even the head rags, are dark with sweat. Still, their fingers never miss a stitch, though they're paid not by the stick, but by the day. And the talk, unbroken news of cousins and acquaintances, unwinding with the ball of twine, a frayed snuff twig bouncing on one lip, the string paying out through their calluses, the piles of wide green leaves diminishing until the men appear with the last slide and clamber up the rafters of the barn to line the loaded sticks along the tiers. It's Friday. The farmer pays with a wad of ones and fives, having turned the mule out to its feed and water, hung up the stiffened traces and the bit. He checks again the other barns, already fired. Crude ovens of log and mud where the crop is cured. In that hot, dry, acrid air, spreads a yellowing leaf across his palm, rolls an edge in his fingers, gauging by its texture and its smell how high to drive the fire. His crew is quiet in the pickup truck. Did you think they were singing? They are much too tired to even speak, can barely lick salt from the back of a hand, brush at flies, hush a baby with a sugar tit. And the man who owns this land is also tired. Every day this week, he's meant to bring home pears from the old tree by the barn. But now he sees the fruit has fallen, sees the yellow jackets feeding there. He lights a lucky, frames a joke for his wife. He'll say, their banker raised a piss-poor field this year. And she will lean against the door jamb while he talks, while he scrubs his hands at the tin basin with a split lemon and a pumice stone, rubs them raw, trying to cut the gummy rosin, that stubborn black stain within the green. One of life's goals was to move up from being a hander to a stringer. Truly, because that was a real skill. I'll read you two others that have the same sort of background, and in fact, there's a recurring character in these two that I'll read. It's just the point of view that changes. The first is called The Farmer. In the still blistering late afternoon, like currying a horse, the rake circled the meadow, the cut grass ridging behind it. This summer, if the weather held, he'd risk a second harvest after years of reinvesting, leaving fallow. These fields were why he farmed. He walked the fence line like a man in love. The animals were merely what he needed, cattle and pigs, chickens for a while, a dray horse, saddle horses he was paid to pasture, an endless, stupid round of animals, one of them always hungry, sick, lost, calving or farrowing or waiting slaughter. When the field began dissolving in the dusk, he carried feed down to the knoll, its clump of pines, gate, trough, lick, chute, and two gray hives, leaned into the Jersey side as the galvanized bucket filled with milk released the cow and turned to the bees. He'd taken honey before without protection. This time they could smell something in his sweat, fatigue, impatience, although he was a stubborn, patient man. Suddenly, like flame, they were swarming over him. He rolled in the dirt, manure, and stiff hoof prints, started back up the path, rolled in the fresh hay, refused to run, which would have pumped the venom through him faster, passed the oaks at the yard's edge, rolled in the yard, reached the kitchen, and when he tore off his clothes, crushed bees dropped from him like scabs. For a week he lay in the darkened bedroom. The doctor stopped by twice a day, the 100 stings enough to kill an ox, enough to kill a younger man. What saved him were the years of smaller doses, like minor disappointments, instructive poison, something he could use. But it seems like to me the same guy, it's the same figure, but as you'll see, the point of view is different. This poem is called Amaryllis. You know what that is, right? That's that plant that your great aunt has out on the back porch. And it has that very phallic single stalk up and then the 4 trumpets. It's also the name of the Happy Milkmaid in an earlier literature. in the pastorals. Amaryllis. Having been a farmer's daughter, she didn't want to be a farmer's wife, didn't want the smell of ripe manure in all his clothes, the corresponding flies in her kitchen, a pail of slop below the sink, a crate of baby chicks beside the stove piping beneath their bare light bulb, cows calling at the gate for him to come, cows standing in the chute as he crops their horns with his long, sharp shears. So she nagged him toward a job in town. So she sprang from the table weeping when he swore. So after supper she sulks over her mending as he unfolds his pearl pocket knife to trim a callus on his palm. Too much like her mother, he says, not knowing any other reason why she spoils the children, or why he comes in from the combine with his wrenches to find potatoes boiled dry in their pot, his wife in the parlor on the bench at her oak piano, not playing, you understand, just sitting like a fern in that formal room. So much time to think these long hours. Like her mother, each night she goes to bed when her husband's tired, gets up when he gets up, and in between tries not to move, listening to the sleep of this good man who lies beside and over her. So much time alone, since everything he knows is practical. Just this morning, he plunged an ice pick into the bloated side of the cow, unable to rise, dying where it fell, its several stomachs having failed. Too full, he said, of sweet, wet clover. I feel like now I have to go around and sort of footnote that poem. I read it one time in New York City, and afterward a man came up to me and said, well, that he'd liked some of the poems that I read, but he did not at all like the poem about the cow murderer. And so, so now I feel I have to explain that he was trying to save the cow, of course. I guess if I'd put the name of that tool, I think that's in Hardy. I think Thomas Hardy, he says the name of that thing that they use for sheep and cows. But, why would you have that special tool if you have an ice pick handy? And everybody has an ice pick handy, so just may have to know where to put it either way. But he's trying to save the cow. You can ask in chemistry class why that is so. There's something, it's chemical that happens when the clover is young and new, right? And then it's wet. If the cows go out and eat the young clover and it's wet, they can't burp it back up. So they can't, chew their cud, and then they just bloat, and it cuts off the windpipe. So that's why, it's sort of an emergency tracheotomy out in the pasture. Yes. Well, we try to inform. See, I told you, it's subversive information that's needed. You see, you need to know about the ice pick if you're going to save the cow. I'm going to read a couple of poems that have a very different sound to them. Tom has been, in his little moments up here, like the great teacher that he truly is. He's been trying to, point you to things to listen to. In trying to figure out how to write narratives, how to tell stories in a poem, one of the things that I found out was that there's a lot of actually quite boring information that has to be gotten through because you're moving people through the world. Prose writers know this, and they're used to it, and they do it brilliantly. But I found it really laborious to have to get somebody, from, out of the pasture into the barn or wherever you have to kind of move them. And usually you have to do that with a lot of prepositional phrases. And the song is very flat in it. It has more unstressed syllables than stressed syllables whenever you use a prepositional phrase. So what I've been reading to you are poems that pretty much take a kind of long line, and you heard that certainly from Marilyn's poems, and you heard from some of Eddie's poems too. I want to put just a different kind of song against that. This has a real short line. It's a 3-beat line, and I think you'll hear the way it doesn't coincide with the sentence. It doesn't mean to coincide with the sentence. This is a poem called Long Marriage. Forward his numb foot, back her foot, his chin on her head on his collarbone. During those marathons between wars, our vivid, dark times, each dancer holds the other up. So he, as the vertical, he barely moves, yet moves, or she, eyes half-lidded, unmoored, can rest. Why these, surviving a decimated field, more than a lucky fit, not planks planed from the same oak trunk, but mortise and tenon. It is the yoke that makes the pair, that binds them to their blind resolve. Two kids who thought the world was burning itself out and bet on a matched disregard for the safe and the sad. Look, one hisses toward the flared familiar ear. We've come this far, this far, this far. Now, you can take that as a cautionary. I think of it as a triumph, but do with it what you will. This is called Lesson. Whenever my mother, who taught small children 40 years, asked a question, she already knew the answer. Would you like to meant you would. Shall we was another, and don't you think? As in, don't you think it's time you cut your hair? So when in the bare room, in the strict bed, she said, you want to see? Her hands were busy at her neckline, untying the robe, not looking down at it, stitches bristling where the breast had been, but straight at me. I did what I always did, not weep. She never wept, and made my face a kindly whitewashed wall so she could write again whatever she wanted there. Here's another one with a real short but not regular line, and this is called The Others. Our two children grown, now is when I think of the others. 2 more times. The macrocephalic sperm battered its blunt cell forward. Rash leap to the viscous egg. Marriage from our marriage, earth and fire. And what then? In the open synapse from God's finger to Adam's hand. The soul sent back. Our lucky or unlucky lost, of whom we never speak. My father was an earth sign and a stoic, an eldest child, a steward, who took dominion over the given world. At least it seemed his 100 acres of it. Pets we ate, rabbits minced in the combine, inchling moths torched in the crotch of the tree to save the peaches. Scorned excess and complaint. Importuned said, no, not, can't, never will. What didn't fit was seeing him cry. He'd stand alone in the field like a rogue pine that had escaped the scythe, as he would stand beside the family graves a short, important distance from the car where we were hushed until the white flag had been unpocketed, and he jangled his keys and got back in, not ever looking at us, not looking at the brisk, instructive face my mother used on clerks, on amputees. This all happened long before my mother, in charge of cheerfulness and world morale, had lost a body part and given up. So it was never in response to her the way he wept, or equally the way he moved through life, one hoof after another. A sentimental man is singular, still the boy whose mother has gone away. The last full day of our last ritual visit, he'd taken a turn already into the field. What set him off was hearing the neighbor's gun. She merely wanted the turtle out of her beans. He hauled the carcass home, 2 feet wide, a rock from the creek, and also elderly if the shell swirls correspond to xylem and phloem, rings we count on the cut trunk of a tree. Taste like chicken, he actually said. Gathering the saw, the maul, chisel, pliers, hatchet, he'd need to unhouse the body and chop it up. No one wanted to help or even watch, except the child intent on the row of knives. And the child changing her mind with a webbed foot's wave. Dinner was not quite dead, but shudders and tears were weakness and wouldn't work. Jokes wouldn't work on temper alchemized from noun into verb, as my father pried the armored plates apart, pale and sweating and silent. And never did he, sun long gone down, once quit the bloody porch, the bowl of the upper shell in shards, the entrails bejeweled with flies, the beaked head, feet, and tail cast off into wet grass, until at the screen, holding a platter of meat, he might have been the Queen's woodsman bringing back the heart. I heated the oil until it spit at me, dredged the pieces in flour as I would chicken, flung them chunk by chunk into the pan. When chewed, undefeated lumps ringed even his dish, he said I'd done the best I knew, not naming the skill, deflecting sorrow and terror into a steady fierceness and aiming that. Thanks for coming to listen to us tonight.